Every week, a psychology professor walks into a packed lecture hall and turns into someone else, cracking jokes, pacing the stage, pulling students into playful banter. Everyone assumes he's a natural extrovert. But at the exact midpoint of every single lecture, during the break, he does something strange. He walks straight to an empty restroom and just sits there, alone, in silence. Why would someone who looks completely comfortable in front of hundreds of people need to hide alone, every single time, without fail? Welcome back to the channel. That professor is real, and by the end of this video, his own research will explain exactly what he's doing, and why it matters far beyond one lecture hall. Let's start with the basics. The words introvert and extrovert weren't originally slang. They were coined in 1921 by psychologist Carl Jung, in his book Psychological Types. Jung used them to describe where people direct their energy, outward, toward the external world, or inward, toward their own thoughts and inner world. A century later, author Susan Cain turned this idea into a cultural movement with her best-selling book Quiet: The Power of Introverts in a World That Can't Stop Talking. Cain's research found something striking. Depending on the study, between 1/3 and 1/2 of the population are introverts, 1 out of every 2 or 3 people you know. But here's the first myth Cain wanted to correct immediately: introversion is not the same thing as shyness. They're often confused, but they come from completely different places. Shyness is a fear of social judgment, worrying what other people think of you. Introversion is something else entirely. It's about how a person responds to stimulation. An introvert can be perfectly comfortable speaking in public, making friends, or even giving lively lectures to a packed room. Comfort was never the issue. So if it's not about comfort, and not about liking people less, what's actually different about an introvert's brain? One answer comes from psychologist Hans Eysenck, who proposed that introverts and extroverts differ in their baseline level of cortical arousal, how switched on the brain already is. Introverts, in this theory, start with a higher baseline of arousal. Their brains are already fairly activated, so they need less outside stimulation to feel fully alert and comfortable. Extroverts start with lower baseline arousal. Their brains are relatively understimulated at rest, so they actively seek more noise, people, and novelty to feel their best. This is why the exact same party can feel energizing to one person, and completely draining to another, even if both are genuinely enjoying themselves while it's happening. It's not that the introvert dislikes the party. Their nervous system is already running close to its comfortable limit, and every extra hour pushes them further past it. Now bring this back to our professor. During a lecture, he isn't just standing still and talking. He's reading the room, reacting to laughter, holding hundreds of people's attention at once. For a naturally introverted nervous system, that is an enormous amount of stimulation to sustain, even if he's genuinely enjoying it, and the students have no idea it's costing him anything. This is where a bigger cultural problem comes in. Susan Cain calls it the extravert ideal, the belief, especially in Western culture, that the best kind of person is bold and endlessly sociable. Cain points to Harvard Business School as an example, where, by her account, socializing is treated almost like an extreme sport, and quiet students are nudged to come out of their shell. Classrooms reward constant participation. Open-plan offices assume everyone thinks best out loud. Networking events are treated as the only real way to build a career. For introverts living inside this culture, the message becomes clear, early and often: something about the way you naturally are is a problem that needs fixing. So many introverts learn to perform a kind of disguise, acting outgoing and endlessly available, even when it costs far more energy than anyone around them realizes. Cain calls these people pseudo-extroverts, and found that sustaining the act too long, without real recovery, brings a real cost, elevated stress and measurable strain on the body. Which brings us to a simple question: if pretending to be an extrovert is exhausting, why would our professor choose a career built entirely around performing in front of crowds? The answer isn't that he's failing to be his true self. It's that he understands something most people never learn to name, something that explains his bathroom breaks perfectly. That professor's name is Brian Little, a psychologist at Cambridge University, and by his own description, a deeply introverted person who happens to love teaching. Little is also the psychologist behind a concept called free trade theory, possibly one of the most useful ideas in this entire video. His theory says something simple but powerful: people aren't permanently locked into their natural personality. We can, and regularly do, act out of character, but only for what truly matters. Little calls these goals core personal projects. For him, exciting students about psychology is one, important enough that he willingly steps into an extrovert performance to make it happen. This isn't fake, and it isn't dishonest. It's a temporary, purposeful stretch beyond someone's natural tendencies, in service of something they genuinely care about. But Little is equally clear about the other half of the theory: acting out of character always comes at a cost, and that cost has to be paid back somehow, or it accumulates. Which is exactly why, at the midpoint of every lecture, Little quietly steps away from the performance he just gave, and retreats to what he calls a restorative niche. For him, that restorative niche is deceptively simple: a few quiet minutes alone in a washroom, away from noise and expectation, before switching back on for the second half. It's not a strange quirk, and it's certainly not weakness. It's a precise, self-aware strategy, the exact recovery his nervous system needs to keep doing this, sustainably, week after week. And here's the real insight hiding underneath the whole story: quietly slipping away to recharge was never a sign something was wrong. It's a sign someone understands exactly what they need. The old assumption was that introverts simply need to push through discomfort until they become more comfortable socially, the same way anyone else supposedly would. But if the underlying difference is truly biological, a different baseline of arousal, not a fixable habit, then just push through it was never solving the real problem. What actually works, according to Little's research, is simpler: let people act out of character for what matters to them, then protect their restorative niche as seriously as the performance itself. This applies to extroverts too. An extrovert parent stuck in a quiet, solitary job might need their own restorative niche: noise, calls, motion, anything that restores stimulation, not silence. Little even proposes a free trade agreement, a mutual understanding between people: I'll stretch out of character for what matters to you, if you protect the space I need to recover after. Picture a couple where one loves going out every weekend, the other needs quiet nights home. A free trade agreement might simply mean some weekends out, some weekends in, on purpose. None of this requires anyone to change who they fundamentally are. It only requires naming what's actually happening, instead of quietly judging it as a flaw. If you've ever needed to disappear for 10 minutes after a long social event, that was never proof something is wrong with you. It may simply be your restorative niche, doing its job. And if someone in your life needs to slip away like that, it likely has nothing to do with you, or with how much they were enjoying the moment right before they left. You can start today with one small question: what is your own restorative niche? The quiet minutes, the walk, the closed door, that lets you return to what matters to you. You don't need to become louder to matter more, and you don't need to feel guilty for needing quiet to recover. Both are simply how a particular nervous system is built to work. So tell us, what's your restorative niche, the small, quiet ritual that lets you recharge before you go back out into the noise? Write it in the comments below. Thanks for spending 10 minutes with us today. See you next time.